Hey everyone, and welcome to Developer Tea. My name is Jonathan Cottrell, and today I have the pleasure of interviewing Hampton Catlin. Hampton is the third of the three interviews that I did at Ancient City Ruby. Hampton created Sass, and he created Haml, and now he's working on a project called WordSet. We talk about that in the second part of the interview with Hampton. I apologize in advance for the background noise that you hear. Unfortunately, Hampton and I could only meet in a location that was right next to a cafe, so I've done my best to try to edit out as much of the background noise, and hopefully you can hear Hampton and I as we talk about all of the amazing things that Hampton has been working on. We talk a good bit about Sass, so if you don't know what Sass is, make sure you go and get a little bit familiar before you listen to both episodes. And also follow Hampton on Twitter. His Twitter handle is hcatlin, that's HCATLIN, and let him know how much you appreciate him being on Developer Tea. Now, let's get to the interview with Hampton Catlin. I'm here at Ancient City Ruby with Hampton Catlin, and really glad that Hampton has a few minutes to sit down and talk. We've passed each other a couple times, and luckily, based on all of the breaks we've had at the event, we've been able to actually sit down and do a few interviews here, and so I'm really excited. So we're going to talk about a few different things. It's kind of an open format, so it's kind of a last-minute interview, but I'm excited to do it. So
happy to be here.
Yeah,
it was good we could schedule it. My people called your people. We worked it out. Yeah,
it was really intense. We've got these PR people that follow us around, and
the entourage just worked it out, so it's good.
So Hampton gave a talk that was really interesting about data that he's been collecting. You might have taken Hampton's survey, even if you don't know if you took it. But he collects data on a yearly basis. Tell me a little bit about that.
8 years ago, it was 2008. Time travel. So I was, I've been doing Ruby for about 4 or 5 years at that point, I guess. And I don't know, I felt like nobody was really doing a survey of what was changing the community. I could already see things changing. For instance, back then, MERB was, really gaining traction. But nobody really knew how much. Like, you couldn't answer the question. Like, maybe a friend was working on it, and you're like, I don't...
Right.
Yeah, and I just thought, well, let's do a survey. So I kind of haphazardly built a quick little online survey. And then the next year, I decided to ask the exact same questions again and added on some new ones. Over the 8 years, I kind of got a little lazy about it. Certain years when I was working on other projects, I just totally forgot. Actually, it was Evan Light who helped me get it back up, because a couple of years ago he wrote me and said, Hampton, you gotta keep this going properly.
Yeah.
So I kind of turned into an official project recently. But so we've done 6 surveys. The lowest year we had only about 200 people fill it out, and the biggest years have been about 1,000, which this year I think 1,000 people took it. So we're just trying, so there's always new questions, but I really like, my favorite twist is that we ask the same, even questions that are super dated, I just keep asking the same way. So I apologize if you have to take the survey at this point. After 8 years now, it's like, do you use Moo tools? And it's like, no, I don't use Moo tools. That's a long-forgotten JavaScript library.
Yeah.
But it's been fun. This is the first time I've ever kind of presented it. Like, I put up the data usually, but, I felt like doing some recaps, looking through the data. We rebuilt the site, actually, relaunched it in a couple of days before this. It's now called Asker, like Flickr, which is... Okay. Well, it's the worst name. Like, it used to be called, Hampton's Ruby Survey, just because, I thought it was mostly just me tweeting it out. But I realized it's kind of gotten bigger than that. And also, it's cute naming something after yourself for the first couple of years, and then you're like, it's not so cute anymore.
Yeah.
No, instead of coming up with a good name, though, I think it's better just be like Asker with just an R.
Right.
Like, there's no ER.
Is this why you named Haml? Is this... it even remotely...
That was... Yeah, I get that. I've gotten that question a lot. That's a weird one. Like, it was not to name it after myself.
Okay.
However, the fact that it did happen... I mean, it was HTML, and it was an abstraction, and we're already at the A, and I'm like, and it's a markup language, and I was like, that does kind of sound like my name. Let's go with it.
There you go.
Yeah, but actually, the name was, it actually was from writing it down, kind of what I wanted it to be, and then just the fact that it happened to match my name, I was like, I'm going with this. But the main thing when I first presented it is I named it after Mark Hamill. So I showed a big photo. Usually when I give a Hamill talk, Mark Hamill's the person I show.
Photo, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, why not? If your name shows up in a thing, or it starts to be.
Right.
I guess what makes me weird is that other people would be like, oh, I can't possibly name it a thing that kind of sounds like my name. And I was like, screw it. Let's go.
Yeah. So back to the survey.
All right, yeah.
There's so many interesting things that kind of come out of data, which is I guess an entire conversation on its own about how you aren't like trying to skew the data. Of course, there's certain like parts of you said it's me tweeting it out, so obviously
it's definitely skewed.
A lot of people are going to be using Sass, for example, but there was a lot of really interesting pieces and parts and conversations that were started even amongst the people that I've been around since you presented that data. So, for example, you showed the server, the web server that people basically, like everybody uses, right?
Yep.
And the one that has kind of risen is Puma, right? And Unicorn like showed up really strong and then kind of tapered off towards the end.
Awesome.
And I was sitting next to, I don't remember who, but we were talking about why that might be the case. And I said, it's most likely because Heroku officially supports Puma now.
It recommends it,
Yeah. So there's interesting like artifacts of reality that come through the data that are really cool.
Well, see, this is I guess why I wanted to start the survey. I could go back to the beginning of the question too, which like there's a lot of things to say about data. I don't really trust data. Like I am not actually a data-driven person. Like when I manage teams, I don't. I mean, that's not. Sorry, graphs are cool. I like graphs, like performance graphs, and like whatever metricing people on like dropping the. Like my ops team, I used to metric on uptime and stuff like that. Whatever, that's fine. It works. It's a tool.
Yeah.
But I feel like nerds, we overemphasize and overtrust data. I'm as skeptical as anyone of the data we pulled out. Because there's so many forces acting on it. So for instance, the question, do you use Sass, right? That's one of the ones on there. And I think it's like 77% say yes. Or sorry, maybe it was 82. It was 82 because that's my lucky number.
It was a lot.
I think it was 82.
Yeah.
But it's. I mean, I'm gonna sound really horrible. In a way, that's low and high.
Sure.
So there's a lot of people taking that survey and they answer another question where they say they don't do any web work at all. So do you use Sass? No. However, Sass's main competitor, Less, is not as popular in the Ruby community, so that drives up the number.
Right.
So it's really weird. Like that's not even. It's interesting to have a number to talk about, but it's also, you just can't trust it.
Yeah.
Like there's no way to know what percent of people actually use Sass. Like the best I've looked at is, so it's like Smashing Magazine has tweeted out a couple of quick surveys on that. And it's funny, it ends up being about 82%.
Interesting.
It's been cool because Sass lost a lot of ground to Less, like maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Maybe 4. But it's been kind of interesting to see. I'm sad I didn't ask that question for over the years because I've had to piece it together, which is like Sass or Less, or Stylus, and I have some data on that. But it's funny, Sass has made like a big resurgence, and it's basically kind of knocked Less.
And I think there's a few reasons. I'm sure Bootstrap is on Less. And a lot of people, for that reason, probably were introduced. That's why I was introduced to preprocessors in the first place.
Oh, really?
And so I came in, I was like, wow, this is really cool. And then, Chris Coyer, for example, was like, Sass is the winner. Like, we've been talking about this for a long time. And clearly I'm opinionated. I tend to agree. There's still people who like the other thing. Like, there's still people who use it. But what's interesting is, there are people probably listening to this podcast who use Sass without even knowing it, right? Because it's, first of all, it comes default in Rails. So, and I kind of want to ask you another question about this, by the way.
about the functional difference between Sass and SCSS, and if
Yes.
there is one.
There's no functional difference. No.
Okay.
It's the same language.
So it's a preferential thing, right?
Yeah, it's just, so we tend to call it, so Sass is both.
Okay. Yeah.
Sass is both. There's the indented syntax and then the standard syntax, which is SCSS.
Right.
It was just, Sass started as this kind of sister project to Haml.
Mm-hmm.
I convinced Natalie I wrote up the spec for what I thought the language should do,
Mm-hmm.
and I started coding out part of the project, and then I convinced her that it was a good idea,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of wrote up the list of philosophies, and then she just went crazy, and on an airplane ride back from, I think, RubyConf, maybe 2007, I guess, so 2008, 2007, I think, just took my code, just went crazy.
That's awesome.
And the whole thing flew from there. But it was written then with an indented syntax only because it was the sister project to Haml. I don't have any strong opinions on indentation. I don't hate it. I don't love it. It felt right with Haml, especially with structured documents. That something about that is what I was looking for at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Oh, you're good.
Sass was just kind of naturally expressed that. We wanted to try to make it kind of close. But it wasn't, that wasn't a huge deal for us. And then when the project spun off officially into its own thing, and actually Natalie doesn't work on Haml anymore and is just doing Sass, Les came out at this point as a Ruby project and was compatible with CSS, just like SCSS. And honestly, we were like, oh, yeah, that totally makes sense.
Sure.
Oh yeah, wait, we can do that. That's,
why not, right?
It's just curly brackets and semicolons. We can add those into our language already. That's not it's just one phase of the processing.
Mm-hmm.
So all the back end is the same for the two. Actually, you can mix and match them, absolutely.
Sure.
In different files, but
yeah.
The internal logic and everything is exactly the same. But, it was definitely less that we were, it's funny, it just dawned on us. It's such, technology's like that.
Mm-hmm.
You see an obvious idea and you're like, oh, of course we should have made it CSS compatible.
Yeah, sure.
But, honestly, I could have never imagined that it would, kind of start approximating some sort of industry standard. Haml is a weird language. It was meant to be a weird language.
Yeah, it's very opinionated in that way.
And I just, I wanted to build something that at the time is what I wanted. And, I remember when I gave the first Haml talk, I was just like, well, nobody's ever going to use this except for me. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to, at least I'll get a conversation started. It turns out still, I think 40% or something, I think almost 50% of Rails developers use Haml, which is crazy.
Wow, yeah.
It's actually, it's been showing up higher on the server than I could have imagined. But so we weren't envisioning Sass as okay, let's change CSS.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't thinking that. We were just thinking in our development workflow, what would work best with our Rails flow. I don't know. It's a very different way to think of something. And then when we saw Les and we're like, oh, the things we're doing could be we could pretend like this is CSS.
Sure.
And it was so obvious. And it only took I think after Les came out, I think it was maybe a month later that Natalie did all the coding. Mm-hmm. But, SCSS came out. And the focus changed then because a lot of, actually the syntaxes I hate most in SCSS come from trying to be as close to the way the W3C thinks about CSS as possible.
Sure.
It's clearly not strictly on spec, and it will never be.
Right.
Things like using the @ symbols, that's something that is very much in the language of CSS, so we won't ever violate CSS rules by using those. So it's funny now, we developed with a much different view than we started. Mm-hmm. Now it's very much we have to be future compatible. We really need to think about the future of how this language is going to change. The debates... Yeah. It takes, and this is why I think we have been beating Les, to be honest, is, the project's 8 years old, and it's mature as can possibly be.
Right.
And every single small change to that language, Natalie is very strict and very skeptical of any change. So there are long debates about how to change things, how to do it slowly. And I think that's, less was much more of a... It's funny that the newer one was kind of a much more... they went a little more whole hog. And Stylus is like that. They just kind of... There's some stuff in there that is not CSS syntactically, and there's some edge cases that you can hit. Where Sass, I mean, I'm pretty proud to say the edge cases are
pretty well taken care of.
Extremely well defined. I mean, if they're there, they are very rationally worked through. Because that's all Natalie, by the way. That's not me. Like,
right.
It's all credit for that. Because I'm honestly, if I'd been running Sass all these years, and I had final say, actually even Chris Epstein too, we're both pretty like, that's a great idea. Let's build it.
Right.
Go! New ideas, crazy things. It really takes somebody, to make these projects work, who's like very skeptical of anything new or anything that could break or worrying about that. And she really takes it seriously. And so I think that's where when you do this as your full-time job, I think doing less can sometimes there's definitely things you just can't do, or you're like, I named it this way and I'm screwed now.
Right.
There's some strange mix in syntax and stuff too, where I'm proud to say in SCSS, it just doesn't really happen.
Right.
And that's why most people who are professional tend to kind of switch over, because they're like, oh, I'm not going to find a surprise bug that the developer says, nope.
Yeah, we just can't do it, or we won't, or...
Yeah, because it's backwards compatibility. Once you add something to a language, you can't take it back.
Right.
And that's always the fear. That's why you see these super long discussions, and that's why we take at least 6 months before we add a feature it comes out, because we test it and think about it and try to think of any way that in the future we might regret why we did it this way.
Right.
And it's exhausting.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, it sounds like basically you have your own W3C, you guys are you're running essentially what is a spec long process, because on those mailing lists and stuff, people go back and forth, people like Tab Atkins, they're mailing for
years.
Forever about these things, and they're speccing stuff for years, and going and talking to people and seeing if if they ever see any issues, because it's really difficult. You're writing for the past and the present and the future. All of these features that you're deciding have an effect on projects that have been built before.
Yep.
And they're going to have exponential effects on projects built in the future. And so, and you also have the CSS spec that's being developed in parallel.
Yeah.
That you have to keep in your view at the same time. It's a pretty massive undertaking.
Well, so we like to think or I always think of it as it's like riding a bull.
Right.
What we're doing. We get a lot of freedom because we're an independent project. So
sure.
Honestly, if Natalie gets convinced, that's it.
Right.
She's definitely and it's the right thing. I mean, Chris and I are you go ahead,
hold the
keys,
take it.
It's fine. We'll argue with you and try to make our points. Which it's the natural order of things. Sorry, but you're kind of we're having to listen into those. Or Chris spends a lot of time being aware of the W3C stuff, because we have to. When we're seeing them talk about a syntax that might appear in 12 years, we want to make sure that is something we're already thinking about, even if it never comes in.
Right.
Right? You just kind of gotta it's bucking underneath you, and these threads are happening, and some things are moving, some things aren't. And it's funny, we're very much beholden to them. They are absolutely not beholden to us, if not slightly disgusted at our existence, but that's fine.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, though, because it's probably debatable that what Sass and Les and Stylus have done to CSS is pushed it forward. They've definitely, it's almost like a testing ground for potential features in the future, right? So in some ways, because if you have a question about will people use variables, well, that question has been answered now. I
think, but the downside is, variables are funny,
right?
Because variables, they don't make as much sense in the browser. They don't really give you a lot of savings. When you're compressing the kind of values we have in CSS, like 1px,
right? Putting
the word width there, or, I don't know, sidebar width or something, with compression, it's a wash. It doesn't even matter. Actually, if anything, you made the parser slightly slower because it's got to remember state in a way that it didn't, the CSS parser. It's just kind of a wash for a developer. And then load order is all weird because you can't control it, and namespace collisions between CSS files, and also if you include a
yeah.
library that has variables. Like, there's something very nice and clear about resolving all this before you go to production.
Right.
Like, it happens with a lot of languages. Like, when you compile Java into a bytecode, you know, there's a very different job being Java bytecode and being Java.
Right.
Like, Java needs to resolve everything. It's got variables. It's interesting, the variable spec. When I first saw it, Tab's been working on that one forever. That's his baby.
Yeah.
I did not like it.
Right.
I mean, I still don't.
I'm with
think
you.
It's beautiful.
I'm in the same place. Yeah.
But here's the thing, and this is what I kind of found out from him, and he's pretty public about it now. What he did was include a syntax that now opens the door to a lot more dynamic manipulation of CSS during runtime.
Yeah.
So it's not that. So variables do have some things. CSS variables do some things that are not like normal variables, and they're totally useful in a couple really interesting cases. However, they're not the same thing as using Sass variables where you set colors for your website. They're not even meant to really be that. And a lot of the new features that Tab's working on right now are this kind of extensibility in CSS, which is something we can't actually do from the preprocessor.
Sure.
So a thing like being able to include dynamic layouts on the page that are calculated on the fly by JavaScript very efficiently, and you can write your own style CSS, use attributes that don't exist on the page. That's stuff that preprocessor, I mean, we're still there. I mean, we'll support those. Like,
right.
You know, we'll help you write those. But we're not the browser.
Sure.
And I think it's funny, variables, he calls it his Trojan horse, because what it did is all the browser manufacturers had to do a couple, you know, this is all super weird internal browser building parser stuff. Yeah. But it was to open the door to be able to do a lot of this extension stuff that he was really pushing for.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that there's always, knock on wood. I mean, as long as we're writing CSS, I think preprocessors at some level make sense. They're really just compilers. Like ES6 has some compilers that you can do now to like make sure that when you deliver to the browser, modules are resolved, everything's sorted out before it gets there. It makes sense to do some quote-unquote pre-processing, like compressing an image before it gets to the browser.
Sure.
But I would say the only exception is as long as we're doing CSS.
Right. Right.
You know, who knows what... I'm definitely looking forward to the future where I think we have a much bigger problem with the browser, generally with layouts and how it works. And, you know, Sass helps some. But it's just giving you you're building the same building, but you just have like a hammer that's a little more efficient. Like,
right, yeah.
The house is still, the plans are the same. Like,
right. And I don't think that like this future looks like moving a bunch of stuff that currently is in preprocessors into CSS. I don't think that's the point at all necessarily. But I think that there are like influences because the people who are writing the spec for CSS are now aware, okay, there's a lot of people using these preprocessors now. So we have to figure out a way to.
You'd be amazed how little of a crap they give.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I can't say. I mean, hopefully, you know, I love having my ego stroked that we're affecting them. I mean, the one exception I can think is using extends, which is incredibly complicated to pull off in Sass, and I don't think we should have added it. Just to be clear, I think it's to be avoided. Though it helps in some really nice situations. And the extends feature in Sass is something the browser could do extremely efficiently. We're doing a bunch of hacks to try to simulate something like it, but it will slow down. If your Sass is slow, stop using extends. Like, go refactor, get rid of it. And we're pretty hopeful. I think Tab recently got the W3C to roughly agree to include an extends style syntax. It's not exactly the same. But,
very cool.
Yeah. So that one I'm looking forward to because that's definitely one where we were trying. You know, we're simulating. I guess we have to. When you use extends, we actually have to go build a tree of what we assume your document might look like, and that ends up being billions. I'm not kidding. About it can be depending on how big your style sheets are. It can be billions of nodes. And we have to prune that down to something that you can print into a line.
Oh my goodness!
And all we're doing is assuming likeliness. So it's unlikely that it was an A tag. You probably meant a div, and it's unlikely that the hover style is the one that you were intending.
Yeah.
So we just like take all possibilities and cut it. And it's a hack. It mostly works for people though, but it is.
It's like an experiment more than anything to see like how efficient can you get this really big job, right?
Well, you know, I'll say that's it's one of the few features we added that we kind of got bullied by the other languages on and kind of collapsed too early.
Yeah.
They all had something like extends, and I mean, I'm pretty proud to say that their implementations are much worse.
Performance-wise and everything else.
Actually, more the result than
Okay.
I mean, because the result's what matters. Like,
Sure.
To us, like we'd rather be a little slow and have a fantastic output. I mean, sorry, you can't not have fantastic output. That's number
Right.
one, and then we deal with everything else after that. Yeah. So, but we kind of felt like, if people were like, "Oh, well, I prefer less because you can do this," and this is the one thing Sass can't do. It just kind of sat there for years as a thing that we were like, we don't want to build this, and then Natalie came up with a way to do it better.
Sure.
And like it was reasonable, and then it was like, all right, let's add it.
Thank you so much for listening to the first part of my interview with Hampton Catlin. Hampton, thank you for being on the show once again. Make sure you catch the second part of the interview in the next episode of Developer Tea. We talk about word set, and we talk about why words need to be open sourced. Again, thank you so much for spending time with me today listening to this show. You are the reason that I create the show. If you have any feedback, you can reach me on Twitter at @DeveloperT or at Gmail at developertea@gmail.com. And until next time, enjoy your tea.